I love the space nerds in our chat room because every time we go to start the show, and I don't know that you can see it on the bottom of the screen, but
I don't think you can. Well, you can't.
I mean, they talk about how Spacevidcast is go for main engine start.
Right,
and they start the countdown sequence of how Spacevidcast is going to launch. It's actually quite humorous.
Yes.
It's Spacevidcast has cleared
the
tower.
tower.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, BC.
Welcome to Spacevidcast. My name is Benjamin Higginbotham. With me is the beautiful, wonderful, lovely, talented, and incredibly awesome Carrie Ann Higginbotham.
And bug attracting, apparently.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I've already had 2 in my shirt, so I look like I'm going crazy because they're inside my shirt, so you can't see them, but I can feel them, and they're driving me nuts.
This is episode 232, I think it is?
I believe so.
For Friday, October 23rd, '09, and it is going to be an episode of awesome proportions. We've got Liebergot, who is the on-console for Apollo 13 at the EECOM station, for when Apollo, when you heard the words...
When the fateful words came in.
Houston, we've had a problem. And actually, some people Twittered and mentioned, they said, you got the quote wrong. It's Houston, we have a problem. And that's the quote from the movie, but that is not the actual quote that occurred during Apollo 13, and it's a little pet peeve of mine. So no, we got the quote right. We listened to the tape.
Booyah!
Check that, people.
Maybe y'all should read the book.
So we want to get the Cy in the back part of the show, and it's going to be very, very interesting. And just to tease you a little bit, it's going to involve, let's see here, gangsters, car bombs, running from people, and then of course Apollo 13 and Skylab.
That's all.
And that's,
It's like the most boring book ever. Oh, no, wait.
We'll start there, yeah. We've actually got a copy of the book, and the book is really cool because it includes a CD-ROM that has the Apollo 13 audio for those of you joining us in the pre-show.
Hours and hours and hours.
Yeah. But let's get started with some space news. Space news. That is still an epic graphic. I love it.
Hey, if anybody, I know this is a little bit off topic, so I apologize, but if anybody has seen So You Think You Can Dance, all of the judges the other day on So You Think You Can Dance.
They did this!
And we were like, space news, what's up with that?
I know,
So you think hysterical.
They watched the show. They watched the show.
Just saying.
Coming up next week, next Tuesday, in the U.S. at least.
Yes.
Next Tuesday is the launch, hopefully.
The launch
event of Ares 1X, which is the next generation vehicle from NASA. Now it's and they've rolled it out to the pad. So we've actually had Ares go from the vehicle assembly building. They opened it up, and
it's been stable enough to go from one building to the pad.
And so here we've got footage of the Ares 1X actually rolling out. It took a long time to roll out, and they had to delay the rollout, so it started at the wee hours of the morning. But this is kind of where we start our journey to the moon, maybe, depending on what the Augustine Commission said. We had some live video of that earlier today. But for those who don't know, we are retiring the space shuttle, and this is one half of the replacement. So we've got the Ares 1X, that's this, and then we've got the Ares 5. The thing with the Ares 1X, this is, just to make sure that the thing will fly and work.
Right.
But they had to change from a 4-segment solid rocket booster to a 5-segment solid rocket booster. But this only has a 4-segment solid rocket booster and then a dummy unit where the 5th one is.
Yeah, that was confusing.
And then my understanding is the weight that they've got up top for the Orion capsule isn't the actual proper weight for what the Orion will really weigh.
Right, so why are we doing this exactly?
Kinda. Right? I mean, obviously we need to test this stuff, but it feels like the parameters for this test aren't quite right. It feels like...
Right.
And I'm sure there are good reasons for that, but...
It's like trying to bake a quiche by baking cookies.
Really? That was your analogy?
Sorry, off the top of my head.
We'll have live coverage of the Ares 1X event right here at Spacevidcast.com. If NASA provides it in high definition, then we're going to give you some awesomely epic high definition Ares launching. Now,
and for the first time, we are also going to have a satellite team.
Maybe.
No, we will have a satellite team. I got the confirmation. The satellite team down in the space. What is it called, you guys? It's the space. Park, Spaceview Park, I think is what it's called. And we're going to have Tim down there, and I think Beezy's going to be there, and Corksman's going to be there, and I believe there's going to be a moon pie eating challenge.
Whoa, bringing it up a notch.
Right. So
Spaceview Park, Tim says.
Spaceview Park. So if you guys are going to be down there in the area, please make your way over there. We're going to have Tim on live for some coverage, some, what's going on down there. We're going to be live, and then NASA's going to be on, and all of that fun stuff. So
everyone's going to be live.
It's going to be crazy, and we figured we might as well bring it up a notch because Lord knows the thing is just going to crash on the pad.
Well, that's just it. We should start a poll. I actually think it's going to launch just fine. They've done just a ton of tests on this, and I actually do think it will launch off the pad and it's supposed to just kind of go up and then splash back down. That's much like when they first started testing.
Right, so we might as well have a moon pie challenge.
Right. So I actually think it's going to go fine, but I know a lot of space vidcasters. We've got some who think it's going to explode on the pad, some who think it's going to explode right after it clears the pad, and some who think it's going to jackknife.
Jackknife. I'm in the jackknife category personally.
Right. So if nothing else, it'd be fun to watch. But in the same categories, NASA just recently had the Centennial Challenges regolith.
Yes. Regolith excavation challenge. It's really difficult to say.
And this is the third year we've done this?
I believe so.
So I think it started in 2007, then 2008. So this was the third year we did this. And we have a winner this year, finally.
We have 3 winners.
Wow.
Right. And let me call up the information so we get this all correct.
Now I have to stall.
Yeah, I know.
This is why we're an internet show. Well, for those who don't know, regolith is the topsoil on the moon, at least lunar regolith. Regolith could be topsoil anywhere, but lunar regolith, topsoil on the moon. And unlike the sand here on Earth, it's not been polished by years and years and years of oceans kind of rubbing up against it and having everything else. So it's a very, very sharp material, and that sharp material can cut into spacesuits and destroy airlocks and rip into your lungs, and it's just nasty, nasty stuff. But inside of there are hidden treasures, such as helium-3 and other neat things we can use.
Hidden treasures?
Hidden treasures.
It's a treasure hunt on the moon.
It's a moon treasure hunt. And, all right, go ahead.
Okay, so each team only had a half an hour. They only had one time during that half hour, and they did not get another time, half hour, during the weekend to do everything that they needed to do. They needed to excavate about 330 pounds of regolith, and they did have the 2-second delay to and fro with
to simulate the
controls.
The delay from Earth to the moon.
Right. So first place, which won $500,000, was Paul's Robotics, their Moonraker robot. They excavated 439 kilograms.
Holy cats.
Yeah, that's craziness. Second place, which won $150,000, was Terra Engineering, which displaced 270.6 kilograms. And third place, which got $100,000, was Team Buraundo. Braundo. I can't pronounce it, I apologize. Which also got 263.75 kilograms excavated. So that's craziness and really amazing. 439 kilograms, when really all they had to do was like
50?
150 kilograms. 150. So they went well above and beyond, and that's really awesome. And then so that means that basically $750,000 was given out all in one.
So congratulations to the winner. We're huge fans of these prize type events.
Love the
Centennial
Foundations,
challenges. The Centennial Challenges, all of those. And speaking of, we neglected to add one of the Centennial Challenges into our weekly calendar that's going to be coming up in a moment. We wanted to touch on that really quick because it is kind of important. On November 4th, we're going to have the Space Elevator contest, which is also Centennial Challenges.
Yep.
And that is not what it will look like at all.
Although
if it was, that's pretty cool.
Sure it will.
The space elevator is the concept where you use the carbon nanotubes.
Right, you've got laser-powered robots that are designed to climb the 1 kilometer long cable that's going to be suspended by a helicopter. And so they've got to fly. They've got to climb the whole cable, or X amount of. No, I think it's the whole cable, and eligible for a $2 million prize.
And the reason this is a big deal is because we expend a ton of energy to get up out of our atmosphere. If we can get vehicles kind of up, I would say into low Earth orbit, but that's a little too far. Yeah. But if we get into like a suborbital area and then we launch from there somehow, magically, that will save us a ton of energy, and we no longer have to carry all that fuel up with us. So far it's kind of a pipe dream, this whole concept, but who knows? Maybe it could become a reality.
Is it a cable dream?
Really?
I'm sorry.
Oh.
You're right. I usually leave those to you.
Ooh, yeah, that was something I would normally do.
I know.
When we come back, we're going to be talking with Liebergot, and in the break, right after the break, actually, we're going to have some of the original Apollo 13 audio. You can hear the loop that he was on for a couple of minutes. So listen to that. It's pretty cool stuff. Right when Apollo 13 called Houston, we've had a problem.
It's a little crazy.
It's a little. Actually, what's really intense is how calm everyone is.
Everyone sounds.
Everyone sounds epically calm.
Right.
So check that out. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hello and welcome to the Crow River Coffee Company in Watertown, Minnesota. Situated on the bank of the beautiful Crow River, we offer espresso drinks, delicious food, live music, bulk beans, and artisan items. You can see us at crowrivercoffee.com. Thanks!
Hi, this is Jeff with your Space Podcast asking for your questions. Why do we never see the backside of the moon? Will the sun become a black hole? Leave your questions in the comments section. Keep coming back to Spacevidcast to hear my answers.
ECS EECOM.
Go EECOM.
You getting your stir now on the O2?
Okay. Might be.
No, that's data.
Why don't you got a
We've gone off the high gain.
crew checklist anyway on board, don't you?
Right.
Don't you got a page update? Well, why don't we read it up to them, and that'll serve both purposes.
All
You can
right.
both have them entered, as well as why don't you tell them what page you want it in the checklist.
Okay. Flight telling you.
Okay.
What's the matter with the data?
Heater current looks normal. Okay.
We got more than a problem.
Okay, listen, you guys. We've lost fuel cell 1 and 2 pressure.
We lost O2 tank 2 pressure
You can see, you want to look at it?
and temperature.
Houston, we've had a problem.
Okay,
Stand by, they got a problem.
See a hardware restart.
both undervolt.
See an
Roger,
AC
main
bus
B undervolt.
there, guys? Or EECOM?
negative flight.
O2 tank 2 pressure?
I believe the crew reported.
We got a main B undervolt.
Okay, flight. We've got some instrumentation flights. Let me add them up.
Raj.
Okay, stand by, 13. We're looking at it.
We may have had an instrumentation problem, flight.
Raj.
Okay, let's get our instrumentation lined up here, you guys.
Go on.
ECS, what do you got? Brownie, you copying us? Air to ground.
The voltage is O2 tank 2. Looking good, Jeff. Pressure, O2 tank 1.
And that was some audio that you can actually get with the Apollo EECOM book, Journey of a Lifetime, by Liebergot, who is our guest today. And you can get this through Apogee Books or via the URL. Actually, I think we've got a graphic for it. You just saw the graphic on the screen, but it's tinyurl.com/Apollo EECOM, and you can grab that off of Apogee Books or the Amazon.com site. The CD-ROM is actually quite cool because it includes video, audio of the Apollo 13 mission, just a ton of audio from the Apollo 13 mission, and then some audio from additional missions, because he wasn't just EECOM for Apollo 13. He was there for a bunch of stuff. So there's some Apollo 15 audio, so forth and so on. So definitely check that out. It is an awesome book. And Cy, thank you so much for joining us today. You have got a very interesting story in your Apollo EECOM book that begins with your childhood, actually. It's almost like you were almost meant for the role of Apollo 13.
Well, it's my autobiography. I mean, it's not just my experiences at the Manned Spacecraft Center. And in fact, there was one gent who purchased the book from Amazon when it first came out in hardback, And he posted a review where he said that, because he was expecting the whole book to be technical, about Apollo or whatever, about space. And he didn't expect it to be my story, about my childhood and the post, my post career experiences. And he said it was a dreadful book, and he's returning it.
I actually think quite the opposite. I think you did a fantastic job of telling the story.
Well, I just want to make it clear. I mean, it is my autobiography, and I had, like a lot of us, had a crappy childhood, and somehow I washed up on the shores of the Manned Spacecraft Center, and I had a career. Can't beat that. Well,
you say you had a crappy childhood. I would have to say, based on what you wrote, that is an epic understatement. I don't even know how I could even begin to fathom putting myself in your shoes. It was, it was just issue after issue after issue, and I'm surprised that you got to where you're at today just by persevering, just constantly overcoming issues all through your life. It was amazing. Like I said in the intro, there were gangsters involved, car bombs involved, running for your life involved, learning how to live on the streets of Philly, if I remember right. It was.
Yeah, I was the only white kid in the black ghetto in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and you'd actually mentioned that you were lucky in the time that you grew up there, and that it was all done. All the fighting was with your fists and not with knives or.
Well, there were broomsticks and knives, right?
Right.
So how did you get from this childhood into the Apollo program? Well, actually, you didn't go straight into Apollo. You worked for a contractor first. How did you get from that to engineer?
Well, I worked for North American Aviation. You couldn't ask for a luckier choice of employers. Well, the important thing is that I got invited up to University of Alaska a couple of years ago, and one of the things they wanted me to do was give a motivational talk to the Inuit kids up there, because they're in one-room schoolhouses and great disadvantages, and I had to talk to them about that, and it was essentially I gave them some of my experiences in Apollo and gave them the kind of talk like, if I can do it, you can do it type talk. And one of the examples I gave them is that kids are very, very, very flexible and adaptable. Mm-hmm. And the extreme example that I painted for him was, I remember seeing movies, newsreels of bombed out Berlin right after World War II finished up in Europe. Mm-hmm. And Berlin was in total ruins. Yet you saw children playing and having a good time and laughing in the ruins. Right. So kids are very flexible and adaptable, I think, and most of them, I think, and they don't bring the baggage with them as they get older. Some do, and that's what psychologists are for, I suppose.
So you went from this childhood, and then you started. You wanted to become an engineer. That seemed to be your passion. At least that was the impression I got in the book. You seem to be very, very passionate about getting your engineering degree.
Anything technical.
Yeah, and you got that. But at the time, you weren't working for NASA. You were working as a contractor that was then working for NASA.
Yeah, as I explain when I do this little motivational talk stuff, like Yogi Berra said, you come to a fork in the road, you take it. Well, it turned out he lived on a little loop, so when you had to go to his house, no matter where you went, you always ended up at his house.
Nice.
He's a smarter guy than we give him credit for, it turns out. But through your life, you're faced with decision points, and it's completely up to you to take the one that benefits you the most. And somehow, in spite of my inclinations, I always got nudged back on this road that I guess I was supposed to be on. And I ended up working for North American Aviation, of all places. And as I explained in my book, describing my book, when I went to work for the Downey Division in Downey, California, there was nobody there. We had no work. There was a sea of drafting boards. That's what we used back in those days. Mm-hmm. There's nobody on them. And we were just barely surviving. And, of course, I was a new engineer. I don't know why they even hired me. There's no work. And I didn't know the effort that was going on at the time, because the grunts never know that they had put in to be a contractor on the Apollo program
Right.
And then there was that one summer that all of a sudden we became the prime contractor on the command service module, the second stage of the Saturn V rocket, and this terrible thing called paraglider, which didn't work out. And all of a sudden, like I said, I went from nothing to being in tall cotton. In fact, I got a call from Aerojet in Azusa, California, where I had worked a summer, and what happens with these engineering companies? You just hire everybody off the streets, and then they sort it out later when the work becomes very apparent. And this guy calls me up from personnel. He says, "We want you to come back and work for us." And I said, "Why would I do that?" He says, "Well, we want you to come back." I says, "Well, why would I do that? All the work is here."
Right.
Well, they make excuses like that. That was kind of a nice scene that went down. Anyway, so I went to work for North American, and it's interesting how you presented choices. Mm-hmm. I was working in a mechanical. I was a double E, but I was still working in a mechanical engineering group on the drafting board. I guess that's where we all started. It's kind of a punishment for new engineers. So I was doing all that, and a friend of mine who had graduated college, but he was about one semester ahead of me, and he said, "Hey, there's a new group that's formed up, a flight operations group, under a guy named Charlie Ackerman, and we're going to support NASA on Apollo with technical data." Mm-hmm. And I said, "Well, that sounds interesting." So I went, followed him, and I went in that group, and then that group went down to Houston, and then I got very bored after a year and a half of just funneling data and information and drawings down to Houston. I asked to be transferred, and I was. And then I found out if you want to work in a space program in the control center, working as a contractor was no place to be back then. Everything, all the prime positions were NASA or Air Force, so we had some Air Force enemies. And so I decided after a year and a half, well, I think I want to become a NASA. And that was the right decision. Every decision that I made, it was almost as though I was being pushed along, was the right one for what I wanted to do.
But you didn't slide straight into EECOM. You started as a assistant flight director, right?
Well, I worked all the positions. I started out as a contractor in the back room, as a sequential events specialist, the parachute system, the separation sequences, and all that. And what made me switch over to NASA, I was out with the flu for a whole week from the back room, and they were running simulations all week, training. So when I came back in, I asked this guy Mort Silver, who had a different part of the spacecraft responsibility in the back room. I said, "Hey, Mort, did I get any calls from the front room while I was out sick for a week?" And he said, "Not a one."
Oh, sad.
That told me that they didn't need me, and I needed to do something else. So then I became, I went and joined a different, when I switched over to NASA, I went into this particular branch organization, and I became a operations and procedures officer, kind of a paper shuffler, make sure that the flight controllers use all the correct forms and that we had the correct data coming in. It was okay. And then for Apollo 4, AS501, which is our first all-up Saturn V, I ended up being assistant flight director, Ben, as you said, on that. And really, assistant flight director wasn't very much. The call sign was AFD. Had very few responsibilities. In fact, the other flight controllers called us aphids, small sucking insect, and because we were useless. We were gophers for the flight director.
Right.
The only assistant flight director that ever existed was Gene Kranz. Mm-hmm. And he never allowed anybody after that to be trained to be a flight director from that position. So, in fact, Len Lunny, who was the flight director on that, told me in certain terms that if he was on his deathbed, I wasn't going to move over and be flight director.
Sad.
So he said, "You really ought to find something else to do." And so I requested to be switched over to Arnie Aldrich's Command Service Module Systems branch, and that became an EECOM.
And so now we don't have. Go ahead.
They kind of push you along. You don't resist that when you say, "Well, that's pretty strong stuff. I think I'll go follow that." And that turns out to be a good decision.
we don't have EECOM anymore. Now we have Eagle. So back in the day, what was EECOM?
Well, they still have EECOM, but they've added Eagle from the Skylab. What happened and I'll go back and answer your question. What happened on Shuttle is a lot more complex than the Apollo spacecraft was. More systems, they're more complex, and they're deeper redundancy-wise, and so it's really difficult to learn. NASA determined early on that you couldn't keep people interested in just boring holes in the sky, and so the attrition rate got pretty high. Now, and to retrain these guys, these people, was a daunting task. It was too much to retrain. So they broke up the EECOM into several different less formidable system disciplines. They just added Eagle, which was the call sign for the Skylab EECOM, by the way. So that's what they did. And when I was at the EECOM on Apollo stood for Electrical, Environmental, and Communications in the beginning. When we got to Apollo 10, we had the lunar module involved. When it came to communications, if one switch was out of configuration on either vehicle, communication-wise, you weren't talking to each other.
Wow.
One switch, and it happened on Apollo 10. And I'd look at I'd look at the lunar module EECOM would tell me, I said, Bob, are you all configured right? And I'd go to we couldn't figure it out. So Kranz decided, and of course, Tom Stafford was the commander of that mission, and he added his comments in very colorful language, because they couldn't separate without the communications people, go down. So Gene Kranz, being as brilliant as I think he was, he decided to take all the communications from the lunar module, from the command module, from the lunar rover, as it ended up, the experiment packages, put them all in one console called INCO, Instrumentation Communications Controller. What a brilliant move. So the EECOM position ended up being electrical, environmental, consumables. It was all of the life support, critical life support systems of the command service module, all of them, including a lot that nobody else would claim, a lot of mechanical systems. We had the hatch, we had the environmental control system, the heating, the cooling, the atmosphere, the cryogenic storage system, the fuel cells, the electrical power distribution, the instrumentation system, and our systems went everywhere. And we couldn't help but learn about everybody else's systems. And so what would happen during a mission or during a simulation, training simulation, you may not know what sandbagging is. Sandbagging is where you delay reporting on something, hoping that somebody else will speak up first.
So you sound better.
Nice.
Sandbagging went on constantly at the launch pad. The booster guys would hold failures or funnies to their chest close, and the spacecraft guys would do the same thing, hoping somebody would break first and say, we got to hold the launch.
A game of chicken.
Yeah, it was a game of chicken. The booster guys would say, hey, we can hold the countdown because we have something just came up. And then the CSM guys would say, oh, by the way, we have a couple things we want to report too. Let's go check. That went on in the control center. We had some GNCs, Guidance Navigation Control flight controllers, who sat next to me. They had all the rockets and the hardware of the computers and stuff. They had the other half of the spacecraft systems. And I swear, I knew something would go wrong in their system. I was looking at it, and I'd look at him, and I kept waiting for him to report the failure or the funny. And he wouldn't do it. And finally, the flight director would say, somebody else would probably see it that was related to their system, and the flight director would say, well, I guess that's yours, isn't it, EECOM? We say, yeah. And I'd give this look to the GNC. They sandbag this all the time. It's amazing.
Sounds like EECOM kind of almost became the catch-all for anything that anyone else didn't really want to do.
Yeah.
EECOM was a catch-all, and our tradition was we were always honest, and we were terribly honest. And we followed Kraft's edicts from Mercury, literally, and that was, if you didn't know something, say you don't know. Don't try to BS me, because I'll throw your butt out of the control center, which he had done during Mercury. You don't. The guys like, in those days, people who became flight director were really smart. And even if they didn't understand fully your particular hardware system, they knew when you were BSing them. There was no doubt. So we were brutally honest with that. That was our tradition.
Nice.
So let's work our way up to Apollo 13, which was kind of the apex of things going wrong and still being a successful mission in a way. But that wasn't the first time things went wrong on an Apollo mission. In fact, you had, in your book, you talk about missions prior and missions after where things just weren't working right. And you even just mentioned Apollo 10, you had a communications outage. So what did you do in these circumstances?
Well, we just fumbled around, like on Apollo 10, we fumbled around until somebody finally figured out there was a switch out of configuration in the lunar module in that case. On the way home on Apollo 10, and I cover this in my book, and by the way, Gene Cernan left it out of his book, and I told him to his face that he had, because I used to work for him. So, Gene Cernan, what happened was we were coming back from the moon, we were trans-Earth on Apollo 10, and we lost a fuel cell water separation pump that separated water from the hydrogen. We always recirculated the hydrogen for the fuel cells, but not the oxygen. And the pump motor shorted out. And and we saw that. My backroom guys saw that too. You can see the temperatures rising in the fuel cell, and that was 1/3 of our electrical power generation, of course. So I told the flight director, it looks like we got a problem with fuel cell 3. Go check the circuit breaker, phase A, whatever it was, on panel 226, and see if it's popped out. And if it is, go ahead and push it back in. And so Gene Cernan came back on the loop. He said, okay, Houston, I went ahead and I found that circuit breaker popped out. I went and pushed it in, and it followed my thumb right back out. And we said, don't touch it. We could see the data on our strip charts. The short had gotten really worse. Shorts don't get better, they get worse, and short circuits. And so we lost fuel cell. But since we were done with the mission and all the heavy power users, we didn't need the third fuel cell except for redundancy. We could have got home. We could have come home on one fuel cell. So that was kind of cool. I mean, there's no big deal, except that Gene Cernan forgot about that and didn't put it in his autobiography.
It would have been a big deal if it was on Apollo 11. They would have had to abort their moon landing.
I'm sorry, say again, Ben?
If they were on Apollo 11, that would have been a much bigger deal because they would have had to abort the moon landing.
Oh, no. This is after we were coming back from the moon.
So I suppose then actually it wouldn't have mattered on it. They wouldn't.
No, because they would have been on the moon already.
They would have already been on the moon.
And then come home.
But had it happened, okay, let's rework my scenario.
Out?
Had it happened on the way out, then that would have been a bigger deal.
The rules were if you lost one fuel cell and mission was over, there was no lunar landing.
And then Apollo 12 struck by lightning on ascent. And what was it? It was some switch to aux, which was just a random call.
Well, yeah. And then on Apollo 12, I was the pre-launch EECOM, and I handed over to John Aaron, our true steely-eyed missile man. Just a absolute bright guy gifted with good common sense and a photographic memory.
Wow.
It's amazing. And so I handed over to John. Of course, I just sat there during the launch, and then we watched as Jerry Griffin, the flight director, and Rocco Petrone, who's the launch director, both violated the rules and launched into a thunderstorm.
Which would totally not happen today.
Oh, no. I don't know. You know, I have not gone back, and I'm not going to ask Jerry Griffin why he did that. But they were both rookie launchers, so that could have been it. But anyway, what happened is that, as you know, we pretty much the exhaust plume pretty much made its own lightning, and and so we were hit by lightning. I sat there with John Aaron. He just kind of stared at the data. The data was static.
Wow.
That's what I was hoping happened on Apollo 13.
Right.
And
Right.
data was static, but we were really smart because we launched with the little 3 entry batteries online in parallel with the fuel cells. So they kicked offline, but we still have the entry battery supplying power. And John had seen this failure before during a pad test, and he remembered. And it was that we had lost the power supply to the signal conditioning equipment for all the instrumentation.
Mm-hmm.
But we had a backup power supply, an auxiliary power supply, which was the other switch position.
Oh.
And so he just said, John was amazing. He sat there quiet, never said a word, and finally he said, "Flight EECOM," he says, "tell the crew to SCE to aux." That's all he said.
And then they reply with, "Wait, what?"
Say again.
Al
What?
Bean, I listened to the onboard audio. Al Bean says they never understood the instrumentation system or the communication systems. They never did. And he said, SBE to what? So John had to spell it out. He put the switch to the auxiliary position. The data came back. Then he could see the fuel cells been reverse current kicked offline. And he told, after looking at it a while, he told the flight director to go ahead and put the fuel cells back online, one at a time, of course. And then we went into lunar orbit, into Earth orbit, check out the systems, and went to the moon. Now I get asked, so what would we have done today?
Mm-hmm.
Would we have said, even after checking all the systems out, everything looked good, and the guidance system looked good, the platform was good in Earth orbit, would we have done TLI, translunar injection burn, today? Maybe not, because we have that phrase that crept into our lexicon after Columbia, it's called risk aversion.
Mm-hmm.
I think there have been too many naysayers, and oh no, we can't possibly take it. No way.
That's an interesting point, because let's move up one step to Apollo 13, the kind of the apex of all these problems. Because up until then, generally any in-flight problems were instrumentation, or you were able to fix it and continue the mission, and the mission was essentially successful.
Yeah, don't forget the module. We had lots of funnies, were enough to get our attention in lunar orbit. Like we had one mission, I have to go back and refresh my memory, where the crew had no insight to this, the abort switch in the lunar guidance computer got set. What it meant was if they had fired the descent engine to go down, they would have aborted. God knows where they would have ended up. But Dick Thorson, who is the lunar module control, or their GNC, saw the bit get set in the computer on his display and said, "Whoa, hold it!" And in 20 minutes, we had a computer patch sent down from MIT.
Wow.
Pretty much bypassing the abort.
Right. Isn't that amazing? And we had solder balls floating around in switches.
Which is still, we'll come back to NASA today, but on Apollo 13, when you start listening to the audio that's actually with the book, it's in the CD-ROM, you can kind of hear when the problems first started happening, you're losing power. They're talking about bumps and shimmies and venting things into space. They're still talking about, well, let's not lose the mission.
Right.
It was not at first assumed that the mission is all lost at this point. We can work around this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was our approach to everything. It isn't to say, like I say in my lectures, at some point we had to accept the fact that denial was not just a river in Egypt. So we were hoping that wasn't the case, but it became very clear that was the case. Within 20 minutes, it was, at least to me, it was clear that the failure was real, and I got over my denial, and we knew from all of our training that most of the problems, we knew we could work the problem, as we would say, and we would. We could always work our way around. We could always get ourselves in a position where we would be sustainable, but this was way beyond anything that we'd ever faced before in training. This was not a sustainable failure. This was death. And I knew that pretty much, that we were in deep yogurt in about 20 minutes. Somebody would say, well, why'd you wait 20 minutes? I had to work through all the damn options, and finally I couldn't go any place beyond that. and I had to accept the fact that we were near death's door. And then about 46 minutes. Remember, I was in the last hour of my 8-hour shift.
Yeah.
And by the way, time does kind of dilate on you.
Yeah, I bet it does.
It does.
I bet minutes
Really
feel
does.
like hours.
And about 46 minutes into the failure, it was quite obvious that we were, especially when my backroom guys told me when we had less than 2 hours left on the remaining oxygen. I just told flight director that we better think about getting in the LEM. So the EECOM was the first one to say, let's get in the LEM. Not the flight director, not the FIDO, not the GNC, not the LEM guys. It was the EECOM.
Well, everyone kind of turned to you, it sounds like, in the audio. Everyone was like, EECOM, what's going on here? And I mean, at first, it sounds like you were just trying to work out. You just didn't know what was going on. It sounded like there was confusion, like we've got triple and quadruple failures. That doesn't happen.
We had, I guess, what is best described as a cascading failure, and that if you weren't watching, I mean, it cascaded so quickly, you didn't know where it started. And that was always the case. We would, if we had a failure, we always could work our way backwards to somehow to where the failure began, but not in this case, because like you said, man, we ended up, it was pretty much a multiple systems failure ending up in quadruple failures, and just it was pretty overwhelming, I gotta tell you.
So how did you deal with it? I mean, you've got a situation you've not encountered before, data that you're hoping is bad data, and a vehicle that's bleeding to death. How did you, I mean, I'll go back to your childhood. Did you kind of draw on that to get you through this? How did you just prevent yourself from getting up and walking out?
The childhood thing was just, what happens if you have a bum childhood, you learn to control your emotions. And that's the scar that you carry through life. You can never quite let yourself go and cry at the drop of a sad story. Though I'm getting better now. But it was, that was set in place. But the training was the thing that really did it for you, because the training, you were able to prove to yourself and prove to everybody else that you could pretty much deal with any problem thrown at you in conjunction with your backroom guys, your more expert people. I had a couple of guys in the back that were specialists, and we worked as a team for sure. And there was no doubt in my mind we could just about handle anything and come out okay. But not in this case. It took a little while to finally say, this is real, and this is what I'm faced with. I'm faced with 2 of the 3 fuel cells dead. That's 2/3 of the electrical power generation distribution dead. I've got a oxygen tank number 2. I never say that but I didn't have to say it.
Yeah.
I was busy working the problem. Oxygen tank cryogenic oxygen tank number 2 gone, and number 1 coming down in a hurry. And we had less than 3 hours of life left in the command service body. So within 4 minutes, the 900 psi pressure in O2 tank 1, which is the remaining tank, had come down to, I forget what it came down. It came to about 300, 350 psi. It comes down very quickly. And that got my attention. So what I said, this is reality. I got to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out ways to make the oxygen last as long as possible, so that the remaining fuel cell number 2 would keep power up at least. But boy, it was doomed. When I left the console, there was a couple. They had the team that came on afterwards, Lonnie's team, the EECOM figured ways we had a couple storage bottles of oxygen we could bring online to feed the fuel cell with. They kept the fuel cell going for a period longer, maybe another extra hour. And this poor EECOM, Flint Burton, had to give Flight Director Lonnie a countdown every 15 minutes. He'd have to tell them how much life they had left.
Oh God!
Oh, that would be intimidating.
Scary.
Can you describe what you saw on console? Because you kind of see the pictures of the screen. You've got your screen there that looks like lines of text, but then you've got the row of lights above the screen. Was everything just blinking and flashing in your face, or was it a little more subdued?
Well, in my book, there is a appendix. And what the appendix shows you is all of my console displays at the time.
Okay.
So you can go through those displays, and the time is on the displays, and there's little boxes around the data that changed, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And where this comes from is I had those data displays, I saved them, and back in '94, I got a call from the software company, Arts and Letters, and this guy wanted to, the owner wanted to put out an archival CD on Apollo 13. Not a glitchy Hollywood thing, but an archival thing with the whole voice, air-to-ground voice transcript, the Courtright Commission's things, and the 4 hours of audio from my console is on. And by the way, what I did with the 4 hours of data on that CD, which is still available, by the way, I took and broke it up into like 1-minute snippets or 2-minute snippets that you could click on, and I wrote a caption for each snippet. What they were talking about and who's talking. So it's like it was like a rolling log. It took forever to do. And another thing we did was we took these displays that are in the. You probably can't see it.
I'll give it a shot. See what we can. I mean, I've kind of got it.
It's the actual data.
There you go. Yeah.
From my console, we had to have it regraphed, retyped because the system that we use, control center, is so bad. And what we did was we kind of animated, because we had the times on each of these, the environmental control system display and the electrical power system display, and I wrote a narrative for it. And we had this little lady announcer from some country and western station in Dallas read the narrative for each display, and that's what the little boxes are around the data. She'd bring your attention to it, and we call that narrative the way the data played. And it's really spooky to hear somebody go through that. But that's what these displays are. You can see all the data and how it changed. I just happen to be, one of the things we get trained to do is at the console, if something's going wrong, there's a button to cut hard copies. You keep hitting the button to preserve the data that's on the screen. It was a very crude system. There was nothing digital about it. So, and I just happened to save all this, and it came in very handy. So you can follow the data as it changed, as it played, as we say, for Apollo 13, right from the beginning. So the boxes will show you what changed. Not much really was changing on the data. A lot of lights are lighting up on the overhead, on the eyebrow of the console. What we use those for, we call those limit sense lights. And I do describe that. I teach you how to be an EECOM in the book, by the way. And I tell you about the EECOM console. Those limit sense lights, we use them as telltales. And for example, fuel cell 1 current. Okay. Now, what we would do is we knew what the nominal current for fuel cell 1 would be. So we would set limits, upper and lower limits. Let's say that the nominal current was going to be 22 amps. We would set like, say 30 amps down to 15 amps, that range. And if the fuel cell got out of that range, which was still okay, it would light the light on the eyebrow of the console. And it would draw my attention to the actual display on the CRT, on the tube. Because you couldn't watch it on Skylab, we had 3 CRT days, and we had a ton of lights because you couldn't watch all the data. It was just terrible. There was about 150 parameters here to watch.
So you mentioned Skylab, so let's move out of Apollo for a moment and into Skylab, because I'm actually a pretty big fan of Skylab. I thought it was a really cool space station, a really cool concept, and there were obviously a bunch of issues when it launched with, everything. It just didn't work. And I thought NASA did a really good job of getting it going, but you seem to not really like Skylab that much in your book, or at least not working on the project.
What did I say? I hated Skylab. I hate Skylab for 2 reasons. First, we had this humongous failure of the heat shield came off during launch. And the reason it came off during launch is because they decided to save money and prove the design by analysis. Remember, we did that on the shuttle tiles, and they came off during a prairie flight. Then we spent $20 million on a test project to make sure they didn't come off. And the same thing. And Marshall Space Flight Center did the same thing here. They saved money by by doing it by analysis instead of putting it in a wind tunnel, whatever. And of course, it sheared off during max Q, and the wing came out on the workshop. Now there was one half the power generation on the basic workshop. The other wing was snarled in cables, and it just horrible. So what happened was, a lot of the responsibility fell to the Eagle, which I was. Electrical, what did that stand for? It stood for electrical, electrical and general instrumentations. Electrical, environmental, and general instrumentation. Mm-hmm. We just made it up.
But you got a cool Eagle statue.
And we had the Eagle statue, which kept getting stolen by other flight controllers. It now rests somewhere in East Texas in Charlie Dumas's house. What else was there? Anyway, our job as Eagle was, we're the EECOMs of the Skylab, and it was a tremendous amount of data. The electrical system was an absolute kludge, as only Marshall Space Flight Center could put together. A lot of uninsulated wiring, because why do you need potting and wiring insulation? And so we went into orbit with the Skylab, we couldn't deploy either wing. Well, one wing was gone off the workshop. The other wing wasn't deployable in the workshop. We got the Apollo telescope mount deployed, and the solar panels for that, and the CBRMs. There were 16 charger battery modules. Now we had to control the attitude of for sun angle on those solar panels. If the sun angle got too shallow, the CBRMs would kick offline. And sometimes on the orbit we had with Skylab, we were out of sight for almost an hour. And I remember sitting there watching when I wasn't on duty. Poor Craig Asterosinic, the bird would come over the hill. There'd be one CBRM online, and it was ready to kick off, and we would have lost the Skylab. And that happened many times. The command system we had was very slow, because we had to, in order to bring a charger battery module up of the 16 of them on the Apollo telescope mount, you had to first connect the battery to the bus. Then you had to connect the solar panel to the charger module. I mean, it took like 5 or 6 commands. In the meantime, you're losing the bird.
Yeah, yeah.
It was so tense before we got the first crew up there. There was another thing we had to do as Eagles. I came in one day, and God love him, John Aaron had discovered that there were temperature sensors 180 degrees apart on the workshop.
Yep.
It was an S4B stage, as you may remember. And and if we kept those at the same temperature, then we were wings level. And that's what we wanted to be for the solar panels. Mm-hmm. Okay, if we weren't wings level and the thing got rolled out, then this temperature would be cooler and this one would be hot. Mm. And so we Eagles would tell the GNC we need to roll the spacecraft back about 10 degrees. It was amazing. And the tension. Of course, the whole engineering was wound up, and it was an amazing tense time until we got Pete Conrad and the first crew up there to get that one wing out that we could get out in the workshop and get the additional power.
Right.
It was just, and plus the fact that every day we had to balance the power that was being generated by the Apollo telescope mount and the workshop charger, battery charger modules. And it was so crude, and we had to work with that. And of course, we had Marshall there to help us, obviously. It was their spacecraft. And the crew training wasn't fully up. The first crew went up for 30 days, second crew went up for double that, and the third crew, who was the least trained because of the availability of the trainers, were up there for 84 days. And of course, they got crossways with the ground, and as you know, and but it was a terribly tense time, because the crews that go up there, they come home. Mm-hmm. We would stay on the console 24 hours a day babysitting the thing. We blow the atmosphere down to a half a psi because that's all we needed rather than waste the stuff. And we had to sit there and waste it. And plus the fact that we worked what was called rotating shifts. Mm-hmm. Now, I know some of your audience probably knows what rotating shifts are. To this day, I'm not sure why it was ever invented, but here's what a rotating shift is. 8-hour shifts. You come in 8 to 4 for 5 days, 2 days off. You come in 4 to midnight, 5 days, 2 days off. Come in midnight to 8 a.m. for 5 days, 4 days off, and then start the whole. So your circadian rhythm never adjusts.
No joke.
You get real cranky. I gotta tell you, get real cranky.
I'm sure tempers start to flare, and people just
so cranky with each other. I had to finally go to Dr. Ziegelschmidt. I said, Ziggy, we got a problem here. He said, what do you mean you got a problem? I said, you're worried about the crew's mental attitude when they go up for 30 days or 60 days. I said, we're ready to go at each other's throats down here.
Yeah.
Because of the pressure and the lack of circadian rhythm adjustment, this rotating shifts is doing that. And he said, I didn't know that. I said, this is your opportunity to find out what's going on with the long-duration space missions. And I think he threw around a one-page questionnaire. It was a bunch of crap. But we never had much use for the flight surgeons anyway. So
I love
anyway,
it.
but that was among. I was so glad that when that thing was over, it was such a bummer. There's always something going wrong, and plus the fact we as a flight control team wanted the crew. We accounted for every minute of every day of the flight crew, and the pressure that put on those guys. It was stupid. We're not doing that on space on Skylab, obviously on the International Space Station.
Right.
We learned that lesson. But you can't account for it. Just one little glitch and the whole flight plan for the day goes out.
Right.
Now, we're going a little bit longer than we normally would, but Cy, you're so incredibly interesting. I'm going to run this show long, if that's all right with everyone. I'd like to touch on 2 more points. Before we touch on NASA in the future, I would like to touch on one thing that you mentioned in your book, which was a lighter point, and that was something to do with the lockers, and you had your headsets in the lockers. And it was a...
I'd rather them read that in the book. Back in those days, there were we flight controllers felt that we were like ground astronauts, and we were pretty arrogant about that. And our astronaut colleagues didn't approve of our attitude because they just a lot of them, or most of them, in my mind, just considered us part of the big infrastructure on the ground that supported their effort to go to the moon. Mm-hmm. We certainly didn't feel that way. We were way beyond that because we were the first defense for them for crew safety and mission success. And a few of them got the message. Most of them really didn't. And you had to earn our respect if you were an astronaut. And guys like Al Shepard knew how to play the game like, I'm not going to let you get to know me because then you'll have to fear me, But most of them were okay. Bruce McCandless, God bless him, was born with little common sense. And he, on Apollo 14, he screwed up, in our minds, at least 7 times. And we had a little medal. We cut out a piece of paper and we would give that to him. And I'm not going to tell you what they are, but they were DFMs, dumb medal.
Yep.
Got it.
And he sat right next to me, and I remember one day he made a call off my console of my displays after we already given instructions to Al Shepard and the crew to perform a function, and he woke up and didn't see the response on my data display that he had pulled up on his console, and he starts calling up to Shepard to do that which he had already done, and Shepard was really angry. And I said, we were screaming at him, don't do that. He's going to blame me. And so Shepard came back, dripping acid, Roger Houston, bah, 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 bah. It was really embarrassing. Anyway, I'll let the the public read about this, but I'm not going to tell them. It's too delicious. A practical joke that I played on Bruce about his headset locker, and the end result was that I embarrassed him not in front of his colleagues,
right,
not in front of his peers, not in front of the United States. I embarrassed him in front of the entire world.
Very nice.
Proud to do that.
Let's talk about NASA, where they're at right now. We've got Constellation. In fact, we were talking earlier in the show, Ares 1X is on the pad, ready for launch, essentially. And we're trying to go back to the moon, and they're calling it, Apollo 2.0, Apollo on steroids. But is NASA really capable of doing that again? We've become, as you mentioned earlier in the show, risk averse. Can you go to the moon and be risk averse at the same time? Can you go on to Mars and be risk averse?
I haven't read the report, but I understand that the recommendation was to skip the moon. Been there, done that. It doesn't do anything. So, and I think sometime back Buzz Aldrin said, we ought to skip the moon, and I certainly agree with that. Let's go to Mars. The problem with that is, and I say that in my lectures because I ask that question. I get asked that question. I would just go to Mars. It may take 30 years. It may take more than that. But let's go do it and ask, and people can come along and join us. But we ought to be the leader. Mm-hmm. Well, we can't do that because we don't know how to do surgery in space yet. Mm-hmm. And remember, this mission would be probably up to 3 years long. We don't know how to do that. We don't know how to solve the bone loss problem. Mm-hmm. I said, we'll solve that. So the first space station that I worked on in 1979, 1980, we did have experiments to do surgery in space and control blood, and that's gone. We had a sixth of a G centrifuge module, which is supposed to be on this space station. I think the Japanese were contracted to do that. That's not going to be there. We're not doing the things we need to do to go on a long duration space mission, except just float around in low Earth orbit. But we can solve those problems. Mm-hmm. So my feeling is we ought to just go ahead and go to Mars. The only problem with that has nothing to do with risk aversion. It has to do with politics. The problem is that no senator and no congressman is going to sign up for a mission for a project that's going to need 30 years of funding. The only thing that they're interested in is getting reelected, so they're not going to fund anything beyond their term of office. Mm-hmm. And they've already demonstrated that. There's no funding more than 2 years, I think. I think NASA was asking for 5 years of funding, and it didn't happen. They got us. So I don't believe we're ever going to do anything long duration like that because of the funding problem and the politics that's built into it. But we ought to go to Mars. And we've been to the moon. Hopefully the Chinese will leave our artifacts alone. Won't try to bring them back and sell them.
Yeah.
Well, here's a question. If we're not going to do it, because today, at this moment in time, we are the world leaders in space. We've got Space Race 2.0 kind of coming out right now. From a government standpoint, we've got China, India, Japan, Russia, all kind of trying to go back to the moon. And a few of them kind of looking at Mars a little bit. Who can do it then? If it's not us, is someone else going to do it? And is that going to just infuriate the American people? Be like, why didn't we do that first? Or are we just going to have we just given up?
Well, there's a couple sides to that. One, the Russians are not going to go to the moon because they're going to charge you $100 million to take you around the moon. That's all they got in their mind. Two, how do we get back to our space station? The last I read, they're going to charge us $51 million per astronaut per ride, and that's just the beginning. It's probably going to add up. We should have just kept the shuttle going. And three, the Augustine Commission said that we needed $3 billion a year in the NASA budget because the NASA budget essentially has gone down because it's never been added to with the cost. It never kept up with cost of living. So NASA's taken a cut, but still been asked to do more, as the old saying goes. And I was just talking to a friend of mine at lunch a couple days ago, and he said $3 billion. He said that's just to keep the station going and maybe the orbiter. He says, but we can't do anything beyond that. It's $5 billion a year.
Wow.
More, not $5 billion total. $5 billion more.
5 billion. Well, I know it was more, or but he said I said, we can't do it then. That's the end of our program.
Mm-hmm.
The manned spacecraft program for the United States is gone. Because I predict that our current administration, our current politicians, I'll be more broad, in Washington are not going to, they're not going to throw any money at NASA. We're done. I hate to be so cynical about it. We're done.
Is there any hope for private space? I mean, we've got SpaceX who's building, Dragon can do lunar return.
Well, we got what Falcon X hasn't proven it can go into Earth orbit yet. It's going to be very difficult to get NASA to agree to use a sometimes flown commercial rocket with people in it. That's going to be really difficult. So I don't, like I think I mentioned to you, and I mentioned to other people. In fact, I was up at San Mateo earlier in the week. I said to these physics students, I said, look, what we're going to do in a couple of years, we're going to end the shuttle program. 5 years, I guess, 5 years after that, we're going to dump the space station in the Pacific Ocean. You can't do that. I said, yes, we can.
We kind of did it with Mir. I mean, we kind of forced their hand there.
Well, but this station is so much different than Mir. I mean, but we haven't produced anything on this station. It's taken so long to finish it. It's like a friend of mine who's a PhD at Johnson Space Center. He's a life sciences guy, and I says, well, John, I said, what do you guys produce out of this space station? He says, nothing yet, but we just about got it finished, and now we're going to produce something. But then we're going to dump it in the Pacific. I know that. I'm just being sarcastic. Anyway, I need to answer a couple questions here, maybe. What do you think?
Yeah, we've got, actually, what do you personally feel about commercial crew to LEO? Ignoring the NASA part of it, just, private space going into low Earth orbit.
I said, God love them, go do it, but NASA's never going to sign up to use them. Commercial to low Earth orbit is going to always be carnival ride. I know it sounds terrible to say that, but if they make money from it, why not? The Russians proved how to do it. $35 million to take a clown up? That's not bad.
Well, although it does cost a tremendous amount to get the space shuttle up, so I'm not sure if that's break even at that point, but the Russians have done it. I think they've whittled their costs down because we keep building more complex technology. They just keep using the same stuff over and over and over again.
Should have kept the Saturn 1Bs and Saturn 5s. But that's not, look, and I put this in my book. There's inside stuff in the book and that part of it. And after ASTP was done, the Apollo-Soyuz project, which is strictly political, and we had the extra equipment to use since we terminated the Apollo program early. This Russian we were standing in a kind of a plotch in the Gilroy Center, and he asked me what we're going to do. This is July 1975. And I said words that just came to me that turned out to be the epitaph for the Apollo program. I said, what we're going to do is, and see if this sounds familiar, we're going to weld the factory door shut, disperse the engineering team, and start all over again in 5 years with shuttle. And he just looked at me wide-eyed and he says, you got to be kidding. We're going to fly 6 more times this year.
Wow. Rinse and repeat.
So we took,
right.
And we rolled over the Saturn V's. I was just astonishing.
Do you think NASA is going to prevent commercial human launch to the International Space Station? Is it because they didn't build it, it's not their own thing? Do you think they're going to do anything to stop it, or they don't really care?
I think NASA is going to be kind of ambivalent about that, in that they probably, on one hand, NASA hierarchy is going to hope upon hope that they will do it successfully and safely, and maybe we could use them once in a while. On the other hand, it's not the NASA way, so it's too bad. I just feel terrible about it, and I just can't be Pollyanna about this thing. The money's not there, and I don't see. You remember what I wrote in a book? What happened was when I was writing the book. It was like 2002 or 2003. Glenn Swanson, who was then the historian for Johnson Space Center, says, he says, I just got a transcript in. They just transcribed some tapes, audio tapes, when JFK was talking to James Webb, who was our first administrator, NASA administrator, and they were talking budget. And he said, you really ought to read this transcript. Boy. And what what James Webb was arguing was, he said, I think what we ought to do low Earth orbit first, and then the secondary objective for NASA ought to be go to the moon. JFK said, I'm paraphrasing, he says, oh no. He says, all I care about is beating the Russians, otherwise I don't give a damn about space.
Well, that seems to be a common problem, though. I mean, no one really seems to care about space. Not just politicians, but, the general American populace. They don't know what's going on. They don't care. They're worried about a boy in a balloon more than they're worried about the space shuttle retiring.
It's the news media. Remember, after only the second mission, the second landing on the moon, that was the end. They didn't care anymore about
That's so ridiculous.
That's the way it is, and it'll always be that way. And if there's not a disaster, then they're not interested in it, and it's a shame. There was something else I want to tell you about that, but we're just stuck there. We're not going to go any further, and I just feel so fortunate that I got a chance to experience up close and up front and close, the golden days of our space program. We'll never do it again. There's no competition. Go talk to a politician and say, well, don't you want to beat the Chinese? Well, why? Been there. We've done it. And by the way, keep in mind also, there was talk, this is hearsay, after we did the Apollo 11 mission, there were some politicians, I was told, that wanted to end the program right there. Look, we did it. We didn't kill anybody. All they were worried about was killing somebody or leaving a couple of astronauts marooned on the moon on their watch.
Yeah.
That's all they cared about. They didn't care about the program, and they probably sat there in tenterhooks. And fortunately, they were able to cancel the program early. So, God, we had so much more to do.
Well, Si, we've reached the limit of what YouTube will allow us to post on demand. So I'm going to call our show right here. If you can stay around a little bit longer for post-show, that would be awesome, because we've got a couple more questions from people in the chat room. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us live. Remember, you can pick up Apollo EECOM Journey of a Lifetime. You can grab that by going to tinyurl.com/ApolloEECOM, and that's 2 E's in EECOM. You can see it on your screen right there. It is a fantastic book. It's a great read. There's a lot of stuff we weren't able to cover. There are some great practical jokes in here too. It's a really fun and entertaining book. And in addition, you get the CD-ROM that has the Apollo 13 audio, the size loop of that, and it is fascinating to listen to. It is.
Somebody stole them, by the way.
I'm sorry?
When PBS came down to do their great documentary on Apollo 13 in 1994, they did diligent, and they found out that we had a tape recorder in the control center that was built at Manned Spacecraft Center. Only one or two of them existed, that recorded every intercom loop, every air-to-ground voice conversation on a 24-track tape.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
The only place it could be played was on this one at the control center.
Yeah.
They did diligent. They went to the National Archives, which I don't know, Washington or Dallas, where they were, and they went to where the Apollo 13 tape was supposed to be. It turns out it was 4 reels. There were 4 empty boxes.
Oh. That's a bummer.
So I saw, and we surmised that somebody from Hollywood probably took him, and they probably found out he couldn't play them, so they're probably rotting, somewhere.
Right.
But you've got your loop inside of the book. Yeah. You've also got Apollo 15.
The only complete 4 hours of the Apollo 13 emergency at my console, all the loops I had up, is on that CD. And then there's a couple. I found I had a take reel. I got into, there were 2 incidences with a new flight director on Apollo 15,
yep.
Where we rather had some disagreements, and one incident he wanted me to do something I didn't want to do because I knew better. Another incident he wouldn't do what I wanted him to do because he didn't understand it and he wasn't going to admit it, and he really tonked me off. And so I accused him of being dangerous, and he came over the top of his console at me, going for my throat. And so I figured I better get those 2 time periods recorded just in case he came after me after the mission. But it's important that I use those 2 instances on Apollo 15 so you can see what it was like to be a flight controller, a real one, and then you can hear it on the CD. So
cool.
It's pretty instructive.
And you know,
came after me.
Space Geek or not, it really is a fascinating book. It is worth absolutely every penny. So I thank you very much for joining us. If you'd like to join us live, you can do so every Friday at 2 o'clock a.m. Coordinated Universal Time right here at spacevidcast.com. I do want to remind everyone, we do not honor daylight savings time at Spacevidcast, which means if you set your clocks back on November 1st, that means the time of the show for you will change. If you do not set your clocks back, because not the entire planet honors daylight savings time, then the show time will not change for you. We're creating a widget for the website so you can figure out when the show is going to be for you. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next week.